Today's shiur begins 4 lines from the top of Daf Nun Ches. We saw in our previous shiur the idea of an arusa having 12 months in which to get ready before the nisuin, before the consummation of her marriage, in order to get together her tachshitim and other related matters for the chuppah. After that time period, we saw then that the woman, the wife, is allowed to demand mizonos from her husband. And if you're dealing with a Kohen husband, so the wife is entitled to truma. And we'll limit our comments right now to what we call the Mishnah Rishona, that said that during the Erusin period, even prior to the actual chuppah, she's entitled to truma. We also pointed out that a woman, by her very nature, biologically speaking, is tameah, is defiled almost a half a month every month during the female menstrual cycle, when you have to take into consideration the actual days of dam, of blood flow, plus the clean days that are necessary to observe before she can immerse and achieve tara. So there's a good amount of time per month when she cannot eat truma. So how is the Kohen, whose basic food supply is from truma tithes, how is he to support his wife during this time after the 12-month period lapses? So we saw a couple of deos in the Tanoim. And as this Gemara continues, as our Omid Gemara continues, we're going to see quite a few. We'll see 5 deos Tanoim in one brisa that will be featured in the middle of this Omid. So now we turn to the Gemara. Rabbi Tarfon Omer, Noisen lo hakol truma. And Rabbi Kiva had said, Omer mechza chulin umechza truma. According to Rabbi Tarfon, she's given just truma. According to Rabbi Kiva, the fact that she is half a month ritually unclean, so during which time she cannot eat truma, he takes that into consideration and says the Kohen will give her half chulin and half truma. As we go on in the Gemara, we're going to notice the use of a geometric form, a house marking. On the side of the Gemara, under our nosei mivneh heading, you see a little house featured. Abaye is in the house. Shnei meimros shel Abaye. Mosei kaim machlokes b'taf Rabbi Kiva be'inyan ma machilim. Truma and chulin. We'll have 2 comments made by Abaye, limiting the machlokas. Under what circumstances does this machlokas Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva appear? And we'll also see as the Omid Gemara unfolds, deois noisofos shel tanoim, additional tanaic opinions. Binyan man noisel leishish nisarsul lekoin v'giazman. How are we to feed her in terms of truma chulin, a woman who married a Kohen and the time has arrived and they're still delaying in the actual chuppah. The Gemara. Omar Abaye, Machloikis bevaskoin lekoyin. The Machloikis Rabbi Tarfon, who said Hakol Truma, and Rabbi Kiva said Mechza Chul Mechza Truma. This is in a case where you have a daughter of a Kohen marrying a Kohen. Avol bevas Yisrael lekoyin. If you're dealing with a Bas Yisrael whose family is not a Kohen family, she is not used to the laws and the restrictions of Truma, and she's marrying now a Kohen. Divrei Hakol means everyone, including Rabbi Tarfon, agrees Mechza Chulin uMechza Truma. The Omar Abaye, Machlokis Barusa. The Machlokis Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva, where Rabbi Tarfon says she gets all Truma. That's when you're dealing with an arusa. Avol benesua, divrei hakol mechza chulin umechza truma. So Rabbi Tarfon then is very limited. First of all, to talk about Hakol Truma, you have to be talking about Bas Kohen the Kohen. And even when you're talking about Bas Kohen the Kohen, we have to be talking about the Arusa. And Rashi points that out. Across from here, Rashi says, Ba'arusa u Bas Kohen, D'hoyel v'hi b'veis aviyah, since she's in her family's house, and she's in her Kohen family house, her father's a Kohen, torah chaviha limkor truma b'chulin limei tuma lefi shehu rogil b'kach. Her father will sell the truma that the husband provided. He'll sell it and buy chulin for her yemei tuma, for her tomei days. Being that he, the father, the Kohen, is a regular, he's used to doing this. So Rabbi Tarfon's halacha of she receives only truma is appropriate only for the arusa. Avol nisua. Now here you have a major piece of information that's missing from the Gemara text itself. So, and Rashi fills it in. So we look at Rashi. Avol b'nisua shenoisein lo ba'ila mezonos b'veisa. A nisua. That means a woman who's consummated her marriage, who is receiving food from her husband, could go mashra ishtoi de sholish. This is a case where the husband has, let's say, has separated himself or left the wife. Now, we're not talking about a divorce, but he's put her, say, under the charge of a executor, a supervisor. He's called a sholish. Disnan Masnisen is taught later in the Mishnah. So if you have a situation like that, a Nisua, so Divrei HaKoil, Mechza Chulin Umechza Truma, the Gemara says. She's not in her family's house anymore. We have to make that clear. In other words, she's not living by her father. And what would you expect? The Sholish is someone that will oversee her funding or her receipt of food, but he is not going to go selling off truma for her benefit. The only one available to do that is the woman herself. And with regard to that, so Rashi says, the honor of a woman is to be private, not to be a public figure wandering from place to place in attempting to sell off the truma. Her father, her brothers are not around her to take care of her needs. So that in a case of a Nisua who's been put under the charge of a sholish, so the Gemara says, as we read already, that even Rabbi Tarfon, every Divrei Akol, Mechza Chulin Mechza Truma. During her Tomei months, what do you expect? What else can you expect of her? So you have to provide her with Chulin. Tanya Nami Hochi. We have a brisa in which we'll see the points that Abaye made are supported. Rabbi Tarfon Omer Nosnin Lo Hakol Truma. Rabbi Akiva Omer Mechza Chulin Umechza Truma. Bamed V'Mamurim. Under what circumstances is this machlokes? Bevas Kohen LeKohen. When it's a daughter of a Kohen marrying a Kohen, Afal Bas Yisrael LeKohen, Divrei Hakol, everyone will agree, Mechza Chulin Umechza Truma. Just like Abaye said, everyone, including Rabbi Tarfon, will agree it's half chulin and half truma that the Kohen will supply her. Bamed v'amurim barusa. Avol b'nesua divrei hakol mechza chulin umechza truma. Again, the second point that Abaye had made. So up till now, we've seen the opinions of Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omer, nosin lo shtei yodas shel truma v'achas shel chulin. That means 2/3 out of 3/3, 2/3 truma, 1/3 chulin. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, this is a fourth sheet. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, no saint law hakol truma. V'hi mocheres v'lokachas b'domim chulin. This expression of no saint law hakol truma is reminiscent of Rabbi Tarfon above. There is a difference between them. We take a look at the Rashi, who he spells out the difference between Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Yehuda. But in Rabbi Yehuda's comment, he says she's given all her food is truma. She sells it and buys in exchange for the money that she gets. She buys chulin food. So Rashi across from here, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Noisnein lo hakoil truma, bein Rabbi Yehuda le Rabbi Tarfon ika. There is a difference between them. The Rabbi Tarfon savar Noisnein lo truma kedei mizonosea. Ve'afapi sheim tzricha lechulin ubo limkor truma ein demei truma magien likach behen chulin. Shein yikorim heim sheharei yikorim heim min truma shakol koifsin aleim. So far, what Rashi has explained within Rabbi Tarfon is that, let's just say, for argument's sake, that a woman eats 10 kilo of food per month. The woman is going to receive hakol truma. She's going to have to sell off part of her truma and buy with that chulin. But the truma that she's going to sell off, let's say for every 2 kilo of truma, and the money that she gets for it is a market rate, a market value that's less than the equivalent amount in chulin. So if for every 2 kilo of truma, she's going to be able to buy 1 kilo of chulin. So that if she needs, let us say, 10 kilo of food per month, and she's going to have to sell off 5 kilo of truma because half the month she can't eat it, she's only going to be getting 2.5 kilo of chulin. So the sum total of food she'll have available is really 7.5 kilo of food when she needs 10. But as far as Rabbi Tarfon is concerned, that's the way it is. She's provided with truma, which corresponds to the amount that the amount of food, objective amount of food she would eat per month. Now, we pointed out, we said it, Rashi says this here, that the amount that she's going to get for the truma is less than the amount than she would get if it were chulin, because chulin everyone wants. There's a greater demand for it, so hence its price is higher. Ula Rebbe Yehuda, according to Rebbe Yehuda, Rashi goes on, Noisnin lo truma kishiur she'im bosa likach mechze chulin lo tivchois min demei machzis chulin. In our example, we said the woman needs 10 kilo of food per month, but she's going to be losing on every 2 kilo of truma. She's only going to get 1 kilo of chulin. So, as far as Rabbi Yehuda is concerned, the husband will have to provide her with an extra 2.5 kilo of truma, so that she'll get the necessary amount, sum told. When she sells it all, she'll have at the end of the day her 10 kilo of food, so that in the sum total of things, she'll have enough truma to sell that she'll get. For the lower price of truma that she'll be getting, she'll have enough to buy the more expensive chulin. So that if we just go back to our example and correct ourselves just a bit for accuracy purposes, according to this, she would need to have 15 kilo of truma, because 5 kilo of truma, that will cover her for half the month. The 10 kilo of truma she'll sell off and get 5 kilo of chulin for that, because for every 2 kilo of truma, we said she would be getting 1 kilo of chulin, which is basically a 2-to-1 ratio. So that is Rabbi Yehuda's approach. But Rashi adds, "Avol torah mechira muto limkor lesito tachas chulin." She'll have to trouble herself, though, put herself out to sell that truma, and that the way we describe things, that's the going truma rate. That information is important as we go on in the source. The source goes on with a fifth opinion. Reb Shimon Gamliel Omer, Kol Mokoim Shehuskura Truma, wherever we say that a woman is going to receive Truma, Noisnim Lo Kiflayim Bechulin. We look at Rashi, Noisnim Lo Truma Kiflayim Bechulin, Kosovar, Reb Shimon Gamliel is of the opinion, Lo Matruchinin Lo Lemochra B'Shavya, we don't trouble the woman to sell the truma at its truma market rate. Elanoisein law truma harbe kadesh titnena bezoil v'timsa loichin harbe. As far as Reb Shimon Gamliel is concerned, we don't want the woman to have to trouble herself to fetch the going rate of truma, but rather we give her so much truma that she could sell the truma at a great discount. In other words, sell it off easily because she's selling it so cheap, below market value, and with that money she'll be able to purchase the necessary amount of chulin for her needs. The Gemara goes on, My binayu, what's the difference between Reb Yehuda and Reb Shimon Gamliel? We already spelled this out, but the Gemara says, Iko binayu tircha. The difference is our expectation of the woman to trouble herself to sell off the truma at market value, which involves a certain amount of troubling herself, versus Reb Shimon Gamliel, who says no, we'll expect her to receive so much truma that she could sell it very easily because she'll be able to sell it at below market rate because she has so much of it, and with the money easily by chulin. Hayavam Eino Machil B'Truma. We pointed out that if the Orus dies during the 12-month period, and then she goes over to a waiting for the Yavam mode, that's a Shemeres Yavam, the Yavam is not going to end up feeding her the Truma. My taima, why is it that the Yavam, as opposed to the husband, in the case of a Kohen, where the 12-month waiting period lapsed, the Kohen husband would then feed her truma. But in the case that the husband died during the waiting period, and she now is waiting for the Yavam at the end of the 12 months is not going to be feeding her truma. What's the reason for that? The pasuk says kinyan kaspo. This is the pasuk that we cited in our previous year, from which we learned that whom a kohen bonds with, he acquires, like an eved or an isha, he feeds her truma. Kinyan kaspoi omar rachmana v'hai the yavama kinyan de'ochifu. It means your own acquisition is entitled to eat from truma, but not one who your brother had acquired. We use the term acquired, that means to establish the legal marital relationship. In the case of the Yavam Yavama, it wasn't Kinyan Kaspo, his Kinyan, it was his brother's Kinyan. And that doesn't come under the rights of Truma eating as accounted for by the Torah. Osta Shisha Chadoshim B'fnei Habal. The Gemara questions some of the statistics that the Mishnah had given. Hashta b'fnei habal amris lo. The Mishnah tells us that if she experienced 11 months and 28 days with her husband, waiting for the chuppah, and on the very last day of the 12-month period he died, and we say, well, since at the end of the 12-month period the husband is not there, therefore she does not get truma. B'fnei hayavam mibaya, where the Mishnah said that if she spent only one day with the husband and all the rest of the months waiting for a yavam, do I need to be told there that she is not going to get the truma at the passage of the 12 months? It's so obvious. If the bulk of the time was waiting for the husband who has the power to enable her to eat truma, and still she doesn't get, when all of the time except for the first day was with the yavam, certainly she's not going to get the truma. So the Gemara says, you're right. Zu v'ein sorach lomar zu kotoni. The Mishnah is in this format, is telling us that if all the days were in front of the husband except for the last day she doesn't get, and that having been said, I don't have to tell you a case where she was only one day with the husband and the balance of the time with the yavam. There, she certainly is not going to get. That's an acceptable Mishnah structure, even though, as we said, the second point stated here is anticlimactic, is seemingly superfluous. That nevertheless it can be found in Mishnayos. Zu Mishnah Rishona. Our Mishnah presented we'll call it the first approach, and then the Mishnah reported Bezin shel Achreim Omru Ein Hoisha Chelis B'Truma Ad Shetikones L'Chuppah. The later courts ruled that a woman does not eat from truma until she actually enters nisuin, which might be more than 12 months have gone by, 13 months, 14 months. There's a delay in their nisuin. Doesn't matter. She's not going to get the truma. My taima, why not? Omar Ula Vitema Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda Mishum Simpon. You have either Ula said this or Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda explained that the rationale behind the Bezin Shel Achreim, the latter ruling, was because of Simpon. Simpon is a term that we're familiar with from our previous shiur, that the husband will discover a mum, a blemish on her body that would be something unacceptable to him, and he'll say, oh, this is all one big mistake, and thereby undo the original marriage. The original kiddushin will be voided. We just mentioned that this is a term we had in our previous year. So now this gives rise to the Gemara. If we spoke about Simpon already with regard to the first ruling, the Mishnah Rishona, what is it doing here in the ruling of the Beis Din Shachram, the latter ruling? So Bishlama Le'ula, the idea of Simpon being introduced now works out well according to Ula who had explained the Mishnah Rishona, the first ruling. Kamaisa was Shemo Yimzegula Kais Bevei Savia. The first stage of the Truma Arusa consumption was explained. Ula explained in the Mishnah Rishona that the fear was, why does an Arusa who, though min ha-Torah, midoraisa, is entitled to Truma, why does she not get the Truma? Because she's still living in her father's house, and you're dealing with a woman who's a Bas Yisrael marrying a Kohen. Her family are not Kohanim. She might, after receiving the Truma, share her Truma with her family members, with her father, with her brother. And we pointed out that after the 12-month period lapses, the Kohen husband then sets aside a place outside of her house for her to receive the food, at which point the fear of her sharing the food with her family falls away. So that was the rationale to explain the first stage of things, what we call the Mishnah Rishona, the first level. Ubas Raisa, as time went on, Bas Raisa means the latter ruling, the Beis Din Shachram, the Mishnah Achrona, they made a Gzeira Mishum Simpon. That even though the reason of Shema Yimzigu La Kais Beisavia no longer exists, there still is a problem of the husband not having had intimacy with her all of this time. We're talking about the pre-Nisuin stage. He might eventually discover a blemish and retroactively she was never, then when he calls off, when he voids the whole deal, he voids their whole marital bond, so we would not now want to have her being eaten truma at any point, because she retroactively had no right to eat truma once everything is called off. So this explanation of the Bezin Shel Achreim being based on Simpon works out well according to Ula, who had explained the Mishnah Rishona as based on Shema Yimzegu La Kais Bevei. So that even though that reason doesn't exist anymore, because after the 12 months the husband is miyachid lamokim, nevertheless Simpon remains a problem. We continue at the top of Omid Beis. Ela Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda, but according to his explanation of the Mishnah Rishona, Komaiso Mishum Simpon, Ubasraiso Mishum Simpon, my binayu. Once you explained the Mishnah, the original ruling being Simpon related, then what difference is there between the Mishnah Rishona and the Mishnah Achrona? Rashi on the third line from the top says, "My binayu klomar ma ro'u rishonim lahatira megia zman ve'elech." According to the Mishnah Rishona, which we said during the Erusin period, the basic Erusin period, the basic 12 months, we don't want her eating truma because of simpon, the blemish discovery. However, after the 12 months went by, she can start eating truma. For some reason, we weren't any longer worried about the simpon. And now, according to the Mishnah Achrona, even after the 12 months, we are worried about the simpon. What happened? Why in the first stage were they not worried about it after the 12 months? And in the second stage, they are worried about it after the 12 months. So much so that they said, no truma eating until she actually enters the chuppah. The Gemara answers, Iko binayu bedikas chutz. The point of difference between the Mishnah Rishona, the first stage of the Bezdin's ruling, and the second stage, the latter stage, is how much do we rely on bedikas chutz. Bedikas chutz means the relatives. This we spoke about in our previous shiur, that when the chuppah time arrives, so he has her bodily checked out through his female relatives and goes on their word. More sovar, the Mishnah Rishona felt, bedikas chutz shma bedika, that the investigation or the checking out that his female relatives do is something that he could rely on, and that if they tell her that she's blemish free to his liking, then there's no more fear of any voiding of the wedding, of any voiding of their marriage. Umor sovar, the Mishnah Achrona, the Bezin Shachreim, felt bedikas chutz lo shmo bedika, that even though his female relative said, oh, she's blemish free, she's beautiful or whatever, nevertheless that's not the same as his actual experiencing it himself. And therefore, according to the Mishnah Achrona, until they're actually together, she is not to receive truma. Until the point he can say, oh, she meets my requirements, she fulfills my standards of physical acceptance. Until that point, and that point's achieved only after the actual nisu and the actual chuppah and intimacy that's associated with that. And up till that point, we don't take a chance by giving her any truma. Now we have a new Mishnah. On the side we have a nosei klali, a general topic heading, and we entitle this sugya hamakdish maisi yedei ishto. Makdish means sanctifies, one who sanctifies the profits, the work production of his wife. The Mishnah. Hamakdish maisi yedei ishto, harei zu oisav oicheles. If a man sanctified his wife's output. It's the Mishnah says she just continues working and consuming that. In simple terms, the sanctity does not take hold. When we speak about the sanctification of the wife's output, Rashi adds, based on the Gemara later on, a Mishnah later on, found on Daf Samach Talmud Beis, there it's spelled out what she is expected to produce. And there the Mishnah mentions a woman who spins wool, how much she's expected to produce on a fixed basis of time, and that's spelled out, so that when we speak about the Ma'aseh Isha, there's a certain basic amount she's expected to produce. HaMosar. Mosar is the amount she produces above that basic amount, the extra. Mosar Ma'aseh Ishto. In this case, Rashi points out the husband was makdish the mosar, not the basic amount. We should look at the Rashi together, because he adds details that are important for the understanding of the Gemara later on. Rashi, a few lines down from here in the Rashi commentary, HaMosar hikdish es moiser ma'aseh ishto, mahi oiselo yoiser al haroi shepasku chachamim. He sanctified the amount beyond the basic amount that she is expected to produce. But he didn't sanctify the basic amount. The husband's rights to the extra amount, the above and beyond amount, is in exchange for the fact that the husband provides her with a mal kesef. A mal kesef, we can say, is a weekly allowance, a weekly cash allowance that is beyond the basic food sustenance that he provides for her. So that at this point, then there are more opinions on this that we'll see later, but at this point, our thinking is that the Ma'aseh Yadayim that a husband gets is in exchange for the mizonos that he provides for her, and the moiser Ma'aseh Yadayim that he gets is in exchange for the mal kesef that he provides for her on a weekly basis. That's the thinking right now. So HaMosar, if a husband sanctifies the Mosar, Rabbi Meir Omer Hektish, Rabbi Yehonasan Berger Omer Chulin. Rabbi Meir says the Hektish takes hold, it becomes sanctified, and Rabbi Yehonasan Berger says it remains Chulin. Of course, we haven't explained any reasoning behind the information of this Mishnah. That is the Gemara's job. On the side, because we have a new geometric form that appears, the diamond, we have a topic heading, Noisei Mivneh, on the side where you can see the diamond, and we've written Machloikis Rav Huna v'Reish Lakish b'inyan hayachas shel habal l'maisi yedei ha'isha yodel shel mi al ha'elyono. There's a machlokes. It doesn't, when you learn the Gemara, it doesn't appear as such, but there is a machlokes between Rav Huna and Reish Lakish as to the output of the wife. Who has the upper hand? Who is in control? Can the woman say, listen, can she say to her husband, listen, I know that my Ma'aseh Yadayim is in exchange for the mazonos that you provide. You keep your mazonos, and I'm going to keep my Ma'aseh Yadayim. Why would a woman do that? That's, one can give different explanations, but for our purposes, just be aware of that as a rule. Certainly, one could easily imagine that if the wife has a very large income, way above and beyond the value of the food that she eats, or if you have a woman that is on a 24/7 diet regimen, whereby she eats very, very little. So the value of the food that she eats to her might be much less than the value of her output. So you can imagine there are reasons. There might be other other reasons, social reasons, psychological reasons, or whatever, that a woman would want to say that. So can she say to her husband, you keep the mazonos, I'm keeping my ma'aseh yadayim? Or maybe she can't. She doesn't have that power. And Rav Huna takes the approach, quoting Rav, that a woman has the upper hand. Reish Lakish, who is presented halfway down the Gemara, where at the beginning of the line, the Gemara says, Upligo de Reish Lakish, which means that Rav Huna's approach is at odds with the approach taken by Reish Lakish. So now, after having mapped out the Gemara a little bit, we go to the text. Omar Rav Huna, Omar Rav. Rav Huna quotes Rav as saying, Yechoilo isha loymar labayla, a woman can say to her husband, Eini mizonis v'eini oisa. I don't want the mazonos, the food that you provide for me, and in exchange for that, in exchange for my forfeiting the food, I am going to keep my ma'aseh yadayim. Kosavar, Rav Huna is of the opinion, Rav Huna quoting Rav is of the opinion, Ki takinu Rabbanon, when the Rabbanon set up their enactments, Mazoni Iker, U'ma'aseh yadayim mishum eva. The husband's obligation of providing mazonos is a core enactment. It's a basic enactment. It's the main enactment. The beginning of their involvement, the rabbinic involvement in this, is to make sure that the woman gets food. That's the main concern. They also realize that if it's like a one-way relationship where the husband is feeding and getting nothing in return, that could result in a domestic sense of strain, ava, ill feelings. So to compensate the husband for the mazonos, which he must provide his wife, there's a concession that he is granted, namely that he receives her output in return. V'chi omra, when the woman speaks up and says, Eini nizonis v'eini oisa reshus biyada, when she is willing to forego the main enactment, she says, I don't want the food, and I want to keep my ma'aseh yadayim, so she has the power to do that. Meisvei, we raise an objection. Tiknu mazonos tachas ma'aseh yadayah. The language here suggests that the mazonos was established in exchange for the ma'aseh yadayim that he receives. And by stating things thusly, one gets the feeling that the main enactment was that the husband must receive her output. And in exchange for that, so he gives her something, he gives her the food. So that's counter to what we said before. Someone says, Ema restate the Tanakh source as follows. Tiknu ma'aseh yadayah, they established that the husband will receive the ma'aseh yadayim tachas mazonos in exchange for the main takona, the original, the basic takona, the basic enactment that he must provide her with mazonos. Leimo misayalei. Can we say that the following, in fact, our Mishnah supports Rav Huna? Hamatish ma'aseh de ishto harei hi oiseh v'cheles. Husband sanctifies the ma'aseh yadayim of the wife, doesn't take hold. She produces and she consumes. My lav benizonis. Are we not, in fact, referring to a case of a husband that has the means of supporting her and wants to support her? And even so, the Mishnah says that the ma'aseh yadayim are not in his domain to sanctify. They're not his to sanctify. You can't sanctify something that's not yours. So with this approach, demonstrating that the husband's attempt to makdish, to sanctify the ma'aseh yadayim of his wife, doesn't get off the ground, would be a demonstration or a support to Rav Huna that the woman is really in full control of her ma'aseh yadayim, and hence it's hers and not his. And as we said, he cannot sanctify something that's not his. The Gemara says, "Lo, that's not the case in the Mishnah, b'she'eno nizones. She's not receiving any support from her husband. Well, if she's not receiving any support from her husband, she's not expected to go famished. So the Ma'aseh Yadayim, under those circumstances, she keeps and buys her own food. But that doesn't demonstrate that she is the boss, that she's the owner of her Ma'aseh Yadayim. It's only because of these extenuating circumstances. The Gemara asks a question, asks a number of lines. If the Mishnah is talking about a case where she's not being supported by her husband, my lememra, what do I have to teach the Mishnah saying that he can't be makdish her Ma'aseh Yadayim? It's obvious that he can't makdish it and that it's hers. Why is it so obvious? Afilu leman de omar yochel HaRav loymar le'eved asei imi ve'eni zoncha. Even according to the opinion that says a master can tell his slave, I want you to work for me, I want your income to come to me, and I am not going to support you. Sounds like a rather harsh arrangement. Hani mili be'eved kanani. That is true when you're dealing with a heathen slave. To lo ksiv be imoch. The pasuk, when it describes a master-slave relationship, it doesn't use the word imoch when you're dealing with a master and an owner of a heathen slave. Avol eved ivri, a person who owns a Jewish servant, dichtiv be imoch lo. The word in the pasuk in Dvorim, Perek Tesvav, pasuk Tezayin, says, we have this quoted on the side of the Gemara, means that the Jewish servant is treated like the owner, maybe we can say even better than the owner. So the things have to be very good for a Jewish servant. And as a result, there's no way that an owner of a Jewish servant is allowed to tell him, listen, you're going to work for me and I'm not going to support you. You can't say that to a servant, a Jewish servant. V'kol shekain ishto. And certainly you wouldn't be able to say that to your wife, that you're going to work for me, I'm going to keep your Ma'aseh Yadayim and I'm not going to support you. If the husband is not supporting her, so she keeps her Ma'aseh Yadayim. That's obvious. And if she's keeping the Ma'aseh Yadayim, of course he can't be makdish it. So why do I have to teach a Mishnah under those circumstances? The Gemara goes on to say, well, those are the circumstances, and it's true. The Reisha of the Mishnah is superfluous. It doesn't really have to be taught. Seifa, it's the Richle. The Mishnah taught the beginning as a lead up to the Seifa, to the continuation, to the end of the Mishnah. And here the Gemara quotes the end of the Mishnah. Mosar, where a husband sanctifies the extra amount, Rabbi Meir Omer Hektish, and Rabbi Yonasan Berger Omer Chulin. So that we wanted to, lead up to the machlokes, to tell us this machlokes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yonasan Berger, which is a reference to the Mosar Ma'aseh Yadayim, and even though she's not being supported, as we said, the Mosar Ma'aseh Yadayim can in fact become sanctified, and we'll have to wait later to understand how that could be. That's something dealt with later in the Gemara. But for our purposes, we don't have a support to Rav Huna from the case of Makdish Ma'aseh Yadei Ishto, that the Hektish doesn't take hold. Nevertheless, Rav Huna said what he did, that a woman is she's the boss, she's in control of her Ma'aseh Yadayim, and she can tell her husband, Eini nizaynis ve'eini oisa. Upligo de Reish Lakish. Rav Huna's approach is different than that of Reish Lakish. It conflicts with Reish Lakish. The Omar Reish Lakish, Lo Tema Taima de Rabbi Meir. Don't say that Rabbi Meir, who spoke about the hektish as being chal. We saw in the case of Mosar, where a husband sanctifies the Mosar. Rabbi Meir says the hektish, the sanctification takes hold. Don't say mishum tekosovar, that the reason for that is that odom makdish dover shelo bali olam. The reason for the hektish taking hold is because a person can sanctify even things that haven't come into being yet. Sanctify something now that will take hold only on an item that hasn't come to be yet. And the time of Rabbi Meir, the reason behind Rabbi Meir is as follows: Mitoich sheyachol lechufa lemaisi yodeha. And here we've dashed underline this expression. This shows us Reish Lakish's approach to Maisi Yadayim. Since a husband can force his wife to produce Maisi Yadayim, that shows us that the husband has the upper hand. Nase ka'omer law, the sanctification that we see here, it's as if he's saying to her, Yikatshu yodayich la'osehem. I'm sanctifying your hands with regard to their output. As far as the ratio is concerned, we already established that she was the reason there the hektish didn't take place is because he wasn't supporting her. So where you're not supporting her, so okay, she has to her Maisi Yadayim, she needs that in order to buy her food. But outside of that, let's say everything that's above and beyond, that the husband can sanctify. And through what mechanism? Is it not so that something that hasn't come into being a person can't sanctify? We said, don't try to explain Rabbi Meir as if a person can sanctify something that hasn't come to be yet. No, a person can't do that. But what is the husband doing? Since the husband has full control over the output, he is able to say, I'm sanctifying your hands, and her hands are something that are in this world. They have come to be. She lives with her hands. So he's sanctifying her hands with regard to their output. The Gemara asks, "V'ha lo omar lo hachi," but the husband didn't say. He didn't say, "I makdish your hands with regard to their output." He said, "I makdish your Maisi Yadayim. I makdish the output." The Gemara explains, Kevon de Shaminon lei Rabbi Meir diomar ein adam motzi dvorav levatola. Rabbi Meir has been heard to say in Maseches Erechin, and we're not going to give the background for that. Rashi gets involved with that a little bit, but according to Rabbi Meir, when a person sanctifies things, he doesn't say something for nothing. That's ein adam motzi dvorav levatola. Since a person can't sanctify something that hasn't come into the world yet, if he says, I makdish your Maisi Yadayim, it's naaseh ka'omer lo yikatshu yodayech le'oseim. It's as if he spelled out the correct language. Once again, because a person wouldn't say something for nothing, and if you left his words as they are, it would be meaningless, because he's saying he's being makdish her output that hasn't come into the world yet. Therefore, we have to understand what he's saying as I'm sanctifying your hands with regard to their production. The Gemara asks, it presents a question, it lasts a number of lines. V'sava Rabbi Meir ein odam makdish dover shelo bo li'olam. Does Rabbi Meir himself really hold that a person can't sanctify something that hasn't come to be yet? V'atanya, ha'omer lisha, man says to a woman, and here we have several lines of what a man might say to a woman. Hareyat mikudeshes li lachash shez gayer, or lachash tiz gairi. I am marrying you, and it should take hold after I convert. Right now, he's a Gentile, and of course there's no marital bond between a Jew and a Gentile. That's just doesn't exist. But he's proclaiming, I'm giving you this money and accept it on condition that you will be considered married to me after I convert, or Or he says this to a Gentile woman, he says, after you convert. Or lachar she'esh tachrer, or if he's a slave, he's a Jewish servant, and he says, he's a heathen servant, he says, I want you to take this money from me and be my wife after I am set free. And when a heathen servant is set free, he becomes Jewish. Or liachar she'tish tachrer, speaking to a heathen bondmaid, saying thusly. Lachar shiyomus balech, man gives money to a married woman and says, I want you to be married to me after your husband dies. Oh, shetomus achosech, or a man is married to a particular woman's sister. Man can't be married to two sisters. So he says, take this money from me, be married to me when my wife, i.e. your sister, dies. Or you have a woman that's shemeres yavam, she's waiting for a yavam to marry her or to participate in chalitza, thereby releasing the yavama to marry anyone. So you have this outsider coming to her saying, take this money with the understanding that you will be married to me after the yavam sets you free through chalitza. Rabbi Meir Omer Mikudeshes, Rabbi Meir says it takes hold. So here you have a case of someone making a deal, say a type of transaction, concerning something that hasn't come to be yet. So Rabbi Meir holds that a person does have control over things that haven't come to be yet. So the Gemara says, Me'ai in. Yes, from this source that we just read, you can see that. Meha leko lamashma minah. But from the case of Makdish Maisi Yodayim, there you can't see. Namely, though Rabbi Meir said that the Moser Maisi Yodayim becomes Kadosh, that doesn't reflect the idea that a person is Makdish Adover Shalom Olam, as we explained earlier, because that can be understood as a case of someone intending to say Yikachi Yodayach Lo Sehem. That he's sanctifying her hands, which are around with regard to their output. Hamosar, Rabbi Meir Omer Hegdish. Here we're going to focus now on that section, the latter section of the Mishnah dealing with the Mosar. Before we go on in the Gemara, we look at the side. We have a Nosei topic heading, in which we see Machlokes Rav Ushmuel Mul Rav Ada, Rav and Shmuel together versus Rav Ada. Beshitas Rabbi Meir. Mosai Chal HaHegdish Al Moser Maisi Yadei Ishto. Rabbi Meir indicated that the Mosar Maisi Yadayim, the amount that's beyond the prescribed output that a woman is expected to produce, that amount beyond the basic quantity, if a husband sanctifies it, so the sanctification takes hold. When does that become sanctified? So now the Gemara. Eimas Kadosh. Rav Shmuel De'ami Travayu Mosar Li'achar Misa Kadosh. The Mosar becomes sanctified after his wife dies and he inherits her. Rabbi Ado Bar Ava Omar Mosar Mechayim Kadosh. As soon as it's produced, it becomes sanctified as a result of the husband's declaration of sanctity. Havi ba Rav Papa. The word Havi means he questioned. Rav Papa questions. What b'mai? What are the circumstances here? And we have triangles, and on the side under the Mivneh heading, we call these Shlavim Levara b'mai Medubar. These are stages to clarify under what are we talking about. Imabal Male Law Mizonos, is the husband providing her with basic food? Ma'al Kesef, is he providing her with that weekly allowance that we referred to before in Rashi? The Gemara. Ilema b'male lo mezonos uma lo ma'al kesef l'tzorchea. If you're talking about a husband that is supporting her with the basic food, sustenance, plus he's giving her the weekly allowance, my time of demand omar la'achar misa kodesh. Why would it be that the sanctity sets in only after she dies? Why would Rav and Shmuel say what they do? Why isn't it sanctified immediately? After all, we explained before that the things that a husband provides are in exchange for the output of his wife. You have the basic Ma'is Yadayim, and then you have the Moser Ma'is Yadayim, and those things are in exchange for the fact that the husband is providing her with mizonos and he's providing with the mal kesef. If he's providing her with everything, so he's getting everything. Why then should the sanctity of the Mosar kick in only after she dies, and the husband inherits it? V'elo kishein ma'ale lo mizonos v'lo ma'ale lo mal kesef l'tzorcheha. Do you want to say that the Mishnah, in other words, that the opinions of Rav and Shmuel apply to a case when he's not providing her with any sustenance and he's not giving her a weekly allowance? Well, if that's the case, my time of demand Omer Mechayim Kodosh, then why would Rav Ada Bar Ava say that the sanctification is effective while she's still alive? If he's not providing her with anything, so she should be able to keep everything she produces, and if she keeps it, it's hers, not his to sanctify. Why then would it become sanctified while she's still alive, indicating that it belongs to the husband? Li'olam b'male lo mezonos v'eino male lo mo kesef l'tzorcheha. We're dealing with a split situation. He's providing her with basic mizonos, and he's not providing her with the weekly mo kesef allowance. And now the question is, the two things that a husband provides his wife in this context, the mizonos and the mo kesef, what are they given to her for what, or in exchange for what are these things given to her? Once again, in exchange for what is he giving her? Mizonos? Is he giving her mo kesef? And here we're going to see a machlokes. And take note of the fact that we have a long answer marking. The double underline highlights the word tiknu. In other words, what the rabbinic enactment was. Rav Shmuel, that says that the Mosar becomes sanctified only after her death, indicating that while she's alive, she's in control of it, and we're talking about a case where she's not receiving that weekly allowance. So the Rav Shmuel hold tiknu mizonos tachas ma'is yadeha. The basic mizono, the basic ma'is yadayim is something he receives in exchange for the mizonos. Mo kesef tachas mosar, and the mo kesef is given to the woman in exchange for the mosar. The kevan de lo koyoyiv lo mo kesef, and since as we set things up, he's not giving her the mo kesef, so mosar dido have, the mosar remains hers. Therefore, there's no sanctification that we can talk about until after she dies. So all that production that she produced during her lifetime above the basic required amount, it becomes sanctified after she dies and he inherits it. Rav Ada Bar Ava Sovar, Rav Ada held that the Mosar becomes sanctified in her lifetime. He holds Tiknu Mizonos Tachas Mosar Umo Kesef Tachas Ma'is Yadeh. The enactment was that in exchange for the Mizonos that he gives her, the husband, receives the Mosar. And our discussion is focused on the sanctification of the Mosar. Is she getting Mizonos? Yes. And as the Gemara explains, let's just keep reading. Umo kesef tachas ma'is yadel v'kevan dekiyoyev lo mizoni. Since the husband is providing her with Mizonos, Mosar, which is in exchange for the Mizonos, according to Rav Ada, didei have, it belongs to the husband, and hence he is in control of it, and hence he can sanctify it. B'mai komiflugi, what's the root of this controversy? More Sovar Rav and Shmuel hold midi d'shchiach mi midi d'shchiach. The exchange is between items that are common. In other words, mizonos is a daily need that the woman has, and she receives that in exchange for ma'is yadayim. Basic work output is common amongst women. They produce the basic amount. umor sovar midi dekayitz mimidi dekayitz. Rav Ada Ba'ava figures that we set up a relationship between things that have a fixed amount, a fixed quantity. So the mais yodayim, as we mentioned earlier, is that there's a fixed amount of output that a woman is expecting, minimum fixed amount that a woman is expected to produce. And so that the mais yodayim is something that she will give to the husband in exchange for something else that's fixed, namely mo'or kesef. Mo'or is a type of coin, an amount of money, a fixed amount of money that she is expected to receive on a weekly basis. So we have this relationship between that which is fixed in exchange for that which is fixed. Meisvei, you'll notice we have triangles that appear in different directions. On the side of the Gemara under the Mivneh heading, we have with the triangle point facing up, it's Delo Kerav Ada, it's like not the approach of Rav Ada, and the inverted triangle is Litovas Rav Ada, like Rav Ada. So we have a source that says the Tiknu Mizonos Tachas Mais Yodea. Now what did Rav Ada say about Mizonos? Rav Ada had said, you can see this by using your markings very quickly. You see the fourth line from the top, there's Tiknu, and we dash in Mizonos for Mosar. This source says Mizonos is in exchange for the Mais Yodayim. That's not like Rav Ada. Amor, so to answer that, restate it, re-understand it as the established mizonos tachas mosar ma'aseh yodeha. The expression ma'aseh yodeha is to be understood as mosar ma'aseh yodeha. That's what Rav Ada said. Toshma. Notice here you have an inverted triangle. We're going to bring a source that will be like Rav Ada. It says as follows: Im eino nosei lo mo kesef litzorcheh ma'aseh yodea shalom. If a husband does not give her the mo kesef, it's a fixed amount, then the ma'aseh yodea, which is a fixed amount, she keeps that. Well, that's just like Rav Ada. Someone says no. Amo mosar ma'aseh yodea shalom. That namely, if he doesn't give his wife the daily mo kesef allowance, then she keeps the mosar. That's not like Rav Ada. However, but did we not learn concerning that? Mahi oisaloi, what does she provide for him? Mishgal chomesh sloim shti bihuda. The chomesh sloim is a weight. Mishgal means the weight of 5 selah of shti is the thin string or thread that's put on a loom when you're weaving garments. That amount of spun wool in Yehuda. Yehuda is a region. This amount is an amount of the Maisi Yodayim itself. So that how can you say that prior to that it says that Mosar Maisi Yodayim is hers, and what is the amount? It's this 5 selah shti in Yehuda. But that's an amount for the basic Maisi Yodayim, not for the Mosar Maisi Yodayim. Mosar is simply a general amount, any amount, an undefined amount above the basic amount. But it's in terms of the actual Tanaic source, it's on the heels of there's this comment about giving you the amount. It must be following on the heels of not the Mosar Maisi, but the Maisi Yodayim itself. So the Gemara responds, Hochi Ka'omar. We can understand the Tanaic source as follows. And with the triangles, we see how we're navigating. And here we're going to have the understanding of the source, and it's not going to be for Rav Ada's benefit. Maaseh Yodea Kamo Havi, the Leda Mosar Yodea Kamo, the basic output of a woman is how much, in order to then be able to discover what would be the Mosar. If I know what the basic amount is, I can then say anything above that is the Mosar. So the basic amount is how much, in order for me to know what then becomes Mosar. Mishkal chomesh sloim shti Yehuda shein eser sloim begolio. So that I can I can keep the source, we'll say in the non-Rav Ado mode, where it said Mosar Maisa Yodea Shelah, and have the continuation of that source speak about the Mishkal Chomesh Shloim. And then I go back to the Torah Shema source, which we thought was for the benefit of Rav Ado, and we understand it as not so. And that Torah Shema source, it said, Im Eino Nosein Lo Mo Kesef Litzorcheha, then the hemshich of Maisa Yodea Shelah really means Mosar Maisa Yodea Shelah. If he doesn't give her the Mo Kesef, then the Mosar belongs to her. And as far as the fact that it goes on to talk about the Mishkal Chomesh Shloim is not a repudiation, or I say a refutation of us talking about the Mosar, because I have to know the basic amount of output in order to determine what the Mosar would be.